God's chosen ones. What? You weren't supposed to survive that, but you did quietly. They gathered in silence, not to pray, but to watch you fall. They thought it was over for you. They whispered behind your back, "She's too broken this time. He won't recover from this one." And when you disappeared, they celebrated. But what they didn't know is that God doesn't bury his chosen. He plants them, and while they laughed, you were growing roots in the dark. While they mocked your silence, he was shaping your resurrection, and now you're standing in the very light they tried to kill. You didn't curse them. You didn't chase them. You didn't clap back. You just survived. And that survival became your roar. That glow, it wasn't makeup. It was fire, refined, holy. So if you're still breathing, still rising, still walking like the weapon they never saw coming, drop 770 and let the spirit realm know. You were never finished. You were chosen. You weren't supposed to survive, but you did. They thought it would break you. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, through shame you didn't deserve, through silence that was weaponized, through betrayals disguised as blessings. They thought if they drained your joy, mocked your faith, starved your hope, eventually you'd give up on God and on yourself. And maybe, for a moment, you almost did. Because the hits didn't stop, the rumors didn't fade, and the people you held with gentle hands were the first to throw stones when you were down. But what they didn't see was what was happening beneath the pain. While you were crying on the floor, heaven was writing your resurrection. While they gathered like crows to mourn your glow, God was stretching his hand toward your ashes. And in the dark, with no applause, no audience, no rescue, you stood up. Maybe not all at once, maybe trembling, maybe quiet, but you stood, and that chosen one was the moment the war ended. Not when they lost power, but when you remembered who you are. Because what they saw as your silence was actually your spiritual ignition. They thought you were backing down, but you were stepping in. And now they don't know what to do with you, because you didn't just survive. You didn't just endure. You didn't just escape. You became the proof that spiritual warfare is real, and that heaven always backs its own. So let me ask you, if this is you, if you've risen quietly from what was supposed to destroy you, why do you think you're still here? Because you were never cursed. You were called. If your soul just whispered, "That's me," drop 7 sentences in the comments and breathe deep, because now we begin part 1. You were never meant to make it, but you did. They said you were done, not to your face. Of course, they said it in their silence. In the group chats you weren't invited to. In the smirks that followed your fall. In the way they moved on like your pain was casual, expected. You were the easy one to count out. Too soft, too sensitive, too deep for a world that prefers masks. They watched life hit you harder than most, and they waited for the collapse. They expected you to fold. They bet on your breaking. And truth be told, you almost did, because no one talks about the ache of surviving, of waking up to empty, of praying with shaking hands, of screaming inside while smiling in public. There were nights you didn't even ask for answers anymore. Just relief. Just silence. Just enough breath to get through the next sunrise. You laid on the floor, not weak, but weary. And still you whispered, "God, don't let go of me." And he didn't. He didn't take away the storm, but he anchored you in it. He didn't remove the betrayal, but he built discernment in your bones. He didn't silence the gossip, but he taught you how to rise without needing to defend your name. Because what they meant for destruction was actually your classroom. Your wounds became your wisdom. Your losses became language. And the death they planned for you, that became your altar. You weren't just surviving. You were being rebuilt, not in front of them, not for applause, but in secret, in silence, in spiritual stillness that they couldn't see, because they were watching your reputation. But God was restoring your rank. You weren't supposed to make it, but you did. You're still here, still standing, still breathing. And now every breath you take is a problem for the ones who planned your ending, because your existence is anointed and your glow is a prophecy fulfilled. Ask yourself this: how many people expected your silence to be your defeat, but now can't stop watching your rise? Soul hook every 30s. You weren't broken, you were being reborn. They wanted you to need them, but you needed healing instead. They saw weakness. God saw worth. You weren't meant to survive, and that's exactly why you did. Because chosen ones aren't crowned in comfort. We're crowned in fire. Part 2. You triggered their illusion with your survival. They didn't just want to see you fall. They needed it. Your failure wasn't a side effect. It was part of their fantasy. They built an entire illusion around the idea that you were the weak one, the broken one, the pawn in their story where they got to play God. And you were cast as disposable. So when you got quiet, they assumed that was your exit. When you grieved, they labeled it weakness. When you stopped showing up, they celebrated like they'd won. But what they didn't understand was that you weren't retreating. You were resurrecting. You didn't post revenge quotes. You didn't beg to be heard. You didn't defend yourself. You just healed. You went inward. You picked up every shattered piece of your spirit and handed them back to God. And that silence, that's what broke them. Because your glow came back without their permission, without their validation, without their help. And it made their entire illusion collapse. They couldn't say you needed them because you never asked. They couldn't say they made you because your rise came after their betrayal. They couldn't weaponize your weakness because you transmuted it into wisdom. And now they're spiraling, watching from a distance, scrolling in silence, whispering prayers that maybe you're still broken inside, but you're not. You're anchored. You don't shine to be seen. You shine because you survived, and that glow, it exposes everything they tried to hide in themselves. Your peace became a mirror. Your silence became a sword. And every time you rise without saying a word, it reminds them of everything they'll never be able to fake. You didn't just survive the lie, you shattered it by living. They thought you were broken, but you were becoming the blueprint. Their fantasy was your funeral, but your presence is now their reckoning. Do you realize what your presence is doing to the lies they believed about you? You didn't just ruin their plan. You ruined the delusion that they ever had power over you. And the worst part, you did it all without trying. Part 3. The spell didn't land at Backfired. Yes, they really tried it. Some of them used gossip. Others used manipulation. But a few went darker. They lit candles. They whispered curses. They crafted rituals and called it protection. It wasn't. It was warfare. And you never even fought back because you didn't have to. What they didn't know is that when you target a chosen one, you don't just send energy into the void. You activate a universal contract, one with consequences. You see, your covering wasn't luck. It was ranking. Heaven doesn't guard you casually. You're protected by name, by bloodline, by spiritual authority. So when they aimed fire at you, it didn't just miss, it reversed. The spell didn't land because it couldn't. Your field was already full of purpose, of divine light, of angels standing in formation. So that energy, it had nowhere to go, except back, and now it's feeding on the very ones who sent it. That's why they're anxious. That's why their sleep is fractured. Why relationships are crumbling and doors are closing they thought were theirs forever. Not because you cursed them, not because you clapped back, but because the divine keeps receipts. And when you violate a chosen one, the law of return begins its work. Quietly, completely, and without delay. You didn't have to raise your voice. You didn't have to prove a thing. Your elevation became the consequence. Now they sit with the results of what they summoned, and they can't blame you because you never lifted a finger. You just glowed. You just healed. You just outgrew the frequency they tried to trap you in. When they sent it, it wasn't just noted. It was recorded. You were never their target. You were their test, and they failed. The spell didn't land because light doesn't make room for low frequencies. You didn't retaliate, and that's why heaven responded on your behalf. They thought the ritual would ruin you, but all it did was reveal you were never alone. You were always chosen. Part 4. You didn't just survive, you became the storm. They thought you'd walk away wounded, silent, ashamed, scarred into smallness. But instead, you came back glowing. Not flashy, not loud, just undeniable. And now, they don't know what to call it. Your peace unsettles them. Your presence haunts them. Because it's not the version of you they remember. It's the version they never thought would survive. You didn't just bounce back. You became the storm they tried to send. Everything they threw at you, the betrayal, the hexes, the smear campaigns, they all became fuel. Fuel for clarity. Fuel for evolution. Fuel for the fire that now walks with you. You used every lie like bricks. Built a foundation out of what they thought would bury you. And the glow they see now, that's not confidence, that's confirmation. Confirmation that heaven didn't just restore you. It ranked you. Now when they hear your name, they flinch. Not because you said anything, but because your existence is proof that God doesn't lose his own. They were hoping to erase you, but now your name lives in rooms they'll never be welcomed in. And you don't even think about them. Not because you're cold, but because you're called. And calling doesn't have time for comparison. They didn't just fail to destroy you. They funded your next level. You became the storm because surviving wasn't enough anymore. Your peace is not a vibe. It's a verdict. They expected collapse, but what they witnessed was a coronation. You didn't just come back. You came back with thunder in your silence and fire in your eyes. And now, you're no longer hiding the storm. You are the storm. Part 5. You slayed without even trying. You didn't clap back. You didn't plot revenge. You didn't expose the screenshots or tell your side of the story. You didn't throw dirt. You just rose. And that was the kill shot, because while they rehearsed your downfall, you were busy becoming divine. You didn't need to scream. You didn't need to prove. You didn't need to be seen. You just kept healing, kept building, kept becoming. And what they didn't understand, what they never saw coming, was that your silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. You weren't ignoring them. You were outgrowing them, and when you finally stopped answering, everything they built on your brokenness collapsed. They needed you to collapse. They needed your reaction. They needed a war. But you gave them nothing, and that's what broke them. Because peace, real peace, is the loudest revenge. And when they saw you still breathing, still standing, still smiling, they realized you slayed them without ever lifting your hand. It was your glow, your restraint, your refusal to stoop, your decision to heal instead of hate. You became the judgment, the mirror, the proof that divine justice doesn't yell, it lingers. And now they're haunted by your elevation. Not because you cursed them, but because you blessed yourself. You didn't need to fight dirty, you walked away clean. You didn't end them. The truth did. You slayed without trying. Because light doesn't fight, it exposes. Your silence was sacred, and they'll never recover from what it revealed. Chosen one. You didn't just survive the fire, you became untouchable in it. And that was the final blow. You didn't just win, you were always meant to. So now you know, it wasn't random. It wasn't just life. It wasn't karma or coincidence, or a cruel twist of fate. It was prophecy. You were never supposed to fit in. You were supposed to rise. The storm didn't come to break you. It came to introduce you to the part of yourself that couldn't be shaken. And now, look at you. Lord, not bitter, not vengeful. Just undeniably still. Because the real reward wasn't revenge. It was clarity. It was peace. It was presence. They don't understand how you made it, because they don't understand what happens when heaven has your name on a scroll. You weren't fighting people. You were outgrowing principalities. And every time you chose grace instead of war, you weren't losing. You were ascending. You passed the test. You weren't supposed to survive it, but you did. You didn't slay with your fists. You slayed with your light. And now you walk with a silence that speaks louder than any accusation. A glow they cannot erase. A peace they'll never understand. You were never soft. You were sacred. And sacred things, when protected, become unstoppable. If this touched something in you, if you know this was confirmation, drop 777 in the comments. Let the heavens echo back your survival. Subscribe if your soul is hungry for more. And share this with another chosen one who's still walking through fire, so they'll remember you didn't lose. You were just becoming